My name is Robert Harrison, and at 66 years old, I've learned that the heaviest burdens we carry aren't always visible to the naked eye. 3 years ago, when my father passed away at the age of 91, he left me something that would forever change the trajectory of my life, and, as it turns out, reveal the true nature of those closest to me. Dad was what you might call old money quiet. He never flaunted his wealth, never drove flashy cars, never wore expensive clothes. To most people, including my daughter Sarah, he appeared to be a comfortable retiree living in a modest ranch house in Clearwater, Florida. What they didn't know was that this unassuming man owned 17 rental properties across 3 counties, held significant stock portfolios, and had real estate investments that would make a small-town banker's eyes water. If you feel like this story might reach you somehow, follow the channel. That way, you help me bring more stories like this, and we grow with every life we learn from. When the lawyer read his will, I nearly fell out of my chair. The inheritance totaled just over $4 million, including 2 beautiful homes, one a beachfront property in St. Pete Beach, and another a sprawling estate in the hills outside Tampa. There were also the rental properties, various investment accounts, and enough liquid assets to ensure I'd never have to worry about money again. But here's the thing about sudden wealth. It changes how you see the world, and more importantly, how you see the people in it. I made a conscious decision early on to maintain the same lifestyle I'd always lived. I kept my job as a high school history teacher for another year before retiring quietly. I drove the same 2018 Honda Civic. I shopped at the same grocery stores, ate at the same restaurants, and wore the same brand of polo shirts I'd been buying for decades. To my daughter Sarah, a 38-year-old marketing executive in Orlando, I appeared to be exactly what I'd always been, a solidly upper-middle-class retiree with a comfortable pension and a paid-off house. She knew I'd inherited something from Grandpa, but I let her believe it was just a family home and maybe a small nest egg. Why the secrecy? Call it intuition, call it wisdom, or maybe just call it an old man's caution. Something about the way Sarah's eyes lit up whenever money was mentioned had always made me uneasy. It wasn't that she was a bad person, she wasn't, but she had expensive tastes, a struggling marriage to a man who couldn't hold down a steady job, and 2 teenage daughters with college dreams that came with price tags she couldn't afford. I loved my daughter dearly, but I wasn't blind to her flaws. My plan was simple: live modestly, invest wisely, and leave Sarah enough to ensure she and the grandkids would be financially secure. The rest would go to causes I cared about: education, veterans affairs, and maybe a scholarship fund in my father's name. It wasn't that I didn't trust Sarah with money. It was that I wanted to see what kind of person she truly was before making any final decisions about my legacy. As it turned out, that test would come sooner than I expected, and in a way I never could have imagined. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late September when my life took an unexpected turn. I was at Barnes & Noble, browsing the history section, when I dropped my reading glasses. As I bent to pick them up, a woman's hand reached them first. "These yours?" she asked with a warm smile. I looked up to see an attractive woman, probably in her mid-40s, with shoulder-length auburn hair and green eyes that sparkled with intelligence. She was dressed casually but elegantly, the kind of put-together look that suggested good taste without trying too hard. "Thank you," I said, straightening up. "I'm getting to that age where everything seems to be falling apart piece by piece." She laughed a genuine musical sound. "Well, from where I'm standing, you seem to be holding together just fine." Her name was Carmen Valencia, and she told me, recently divorced and new to the area. She'd moved to St. Petersburg from Atlanta to start fresh after a 20-year marriage that had run its course. She worked in event planning, she said, specializing in corporate retreats and wedding coordination. We talked for nearly an hour, discussing books, travel, and the challenges of starting over in your 40s and 60s. She was intelligent, funny, and seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say. When she suggested we continue our conversation over coffee, I found myself saying yes before my practical mind could intervene. That coffee date turned into dinner. Dinner turned into a weekend trip to see a play in Tampa. Within 6 weeks, Carmen had become a regular part of my life, and for the first time since my wife Margaret had passed away 8 years earlier, I felt truly alive again. Carmen seemed to appreciate the simple pleasures in life. She was impressed by my cozy house, charmed by my practical Honda, and delighted by our dates to chain restaurants and early bird specials. She never pushed for expensive gifts or lavish outings. In fact, she often insisted on paying her own way, claiming it made her feel more independent. "I'm not looking for someone to take care of me financially," she told me one evening as we walked along the beach. "I've been there, done that. What I want is companionship, someone to share experiences with." It was exactly what I wanted to hear. Sarah met Carmen for the first time at Thanksgiving dinner. I was nervous about the introduction. My daughter had been protective of me since her mother's death, and she'd made it clear she thought I was too trusting for my own good. The meeting couldn't have gone better. Carmen brought homemade pumpkin bread and insisted on helping with the dishes. She asked Sarah thoughtful questions about her work and her daughters, and by the end of the evening, the two women were exchanging phone numbers and making plans to go shopping together. "I really like her, Dad," Sarah told me as I walked her to her car. "She seems genuine, and it's nice to see you happy again." I went to bed that night feeling grateful for the unexpected blessing Carmen had brought to my life. I had no idea that Thanksgiving dinner had been the beginning of my daughter's betrayal. Over the next few months, Carmen became increasingly integrated into my daily routine. She had a key to my house and often surprised me with home-cooked meals when I returned from my volunteer work at the local Veterans Center. She accompanied me to doctor's appointments, claiming she wanted to understand my health better so she could take care of me. At first, I found her attention endearing. After years of living alone, it was wonderful to have someone who cared about my well-being. Carmen seemed to anticipate my needs before I even recognized them myself. She organized my medications, scheduled my car maintenance, and even convinced me to update my will just to be safe. "You never know what might happen," she said gently. "Wouldn't you want to make sure everything is in order for Sarah's sake?" The suggestion seemed reasonable, so I made an appointment with my liar. Carmen offered to drive me, saying she had errands to run in the same area. I thought nothing of it at the time. What I didn't know was that Carmen and Sarah had been in regular contact since that Thanksgiving dinner. They'd started with occasional texts about shopping and restaurant recommendations, but their conversations had quickly evolved into something much more calculated. I discovered this quite by accident on a Saturday afternoon in March. Carmen had left her phone on my kitchen counter while she showered, and it buzzed with an incoming text. Without thinking, I glanced at the screen, intending to call out and let her know someone was trying to reach her. The message was from Sarah. "How's the progress with Dad? Are you getting him to trust you with financial stuff yet?" My blood ran cold. I stared at the phone, hoping I'd misunderstood, but the message was clear. I quickly scrolled up through their conversation history, and what I saw made my stomach turn. Months of messages revealed a conspiracy that was breathtaking in its calculated cruelty. Sarah had indeed met Carmen before. They'd connected through a mutual acquaintance who knew. Sarah was looking for someone to help with her father's situation. Carmen, it turned out, made a living targeting vulnerable older men, gaining their trust, and manipulating them into financial arrangements that benefited her. But this wasn't Carmen's idea alone. Sarah had actively recruited her. "Dad's definitely got more money than he's letting on," read one message from Sarah. "Grandpa left him everything, and Dad's always been paranoid about spending. He's probably sitting on a fortune." Carmen's response: "Don't worry, I'm good at what I do. By summer, I'll have him completely dependent on me emotionally. After that, we can start phase 2. Phase 2 involved convincing me that I was becoming mentally incompetent and needed to be placed in an assisted living facility for my own safety, with Carmen as my concerned companion and Sarah as my worried daughter. They would petition the court for guardianship, claiming I could no longer make sound decisions about my care or finances. Florida's guardianship laws, I learned from their messages, were notoriously easy to exploit. Once they had legal control, they could sell my assets, liquidate my investments, and split the proceeds while I lived out my days in a facility, believing I was being cared for by people who loved me. The messages revealed other details that made me physically ill. Carmen had been researching my background, had discovered the extent of my inheritance, and had been slowly positioning herself to inherit everything. She'd even suggested to Sarah that they might need to speed things along if I proved more resilient than expected. The old ones can be surprisingly stubborn, Carmen had written, but they all break eventually. It's just a matter of finding the right pressure points. I set the phone down with shaking hands and sat heavily in my kitchen chair. In the space of 5 minutes, my entire world had been turned upside down. The woman I'd been falling in love with was a predator. The daughter I'd raised and cherished saw me as nothing more than a bank account with legs. But as the initial shock wore off, something else began to take its place. Not sadness, that would come later. Not even anger, though that was building. What I felt was a cold, calculating fury that reminded me of my father and his father before him. The Harrison men had always been slow to anger, but when we finally reached our breaking point, we didn't just get mad. We got even. Sun Tzu wrote that if you know your enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. As a history teacher, I'd spent decades studying military strategy, political intrigue, and the rise and fall of civilizations. I understood that wars weren't always won by the strongest army, but by the smartest general. Carmen and Sarah had made several critical errors in their campaign against me. First, they'd underestimated their target. Second, they'd grown overconfident and careless. And third, they'd revealed their entire battle plan before securing victory. Now it was time for their old history teacher to give them a lesson they'd never forget. I spent the next 2 weeks carefully observing Carmen's behavior and documenting our interactions. I installed a small recording device in my living room, perfectly legal in Florida, where only one party needs to consent to recording conversations. I began asking leading questions designed to get Carmen to reveal more about her intentions. She was remarkably easy to manipulate once I knew what to look for. A few comments about feeling foggy lately, and she immediately began suggesting I see a specialist. A casual mention of being overwhelmed by financial decisions prompted her to offer to help organize my paperwork. "I just want to make sure you're taken care of," she would say, stroking my arm with practiced tenderness. "You know I love you, right, Robert? I want us to have a future together." The recordings captured everything: her subtle suggestions that I was becoming forgetful, her offers to help with financial decisions, even her comments about how exhausting it must be for me to maintain such a large house by myself. Meanwhile, I began my own investigation into Carmen's background. A private investigator I hired, a former student who'd gone into law enforcement, uncovered a treasure trove of information. Carmen Valencia wasn't even her real name. She was actually Carmen Foster, originally from Michigan, and she had a criminal record spanning 3 states. She'd been married 4 times, not once. 2 of her former husbands had died under suspicious circumstances, though nothing was ever proven. She'd been investigated for elder abuse in Georgia and had been forced to leave Atlanta after a complaint from the family of an elderly man who'd changed his will in her favor shortly before his death. More important, she was already married to a man named Diego Valencia, who lived in Mexico and helped her with her scams by providing false identification and background stories. The private investigator also discovered that Sarah had been in financial trouble for longer than I'd known. She'd taken out a second mortgage on her house. Her husband had been fired from his last 3 jobs, and she was facing possible foreclosure. Her desperation explained everything. With this information in hand, I began to formulate my counterattack. If Carmen was going to play the role of the loving girlfriend concerned about my mental decline, then I was going to give her an Oscar-worthy performance to work with. I began exhibiting signs of confusion and memory loss, but subtly. I'd forget where I put my keys, then find them in obviously wrong places, like the refrigerator. I'd start sentences and trail off, looking confused. I'd ask Carmen to repeat things she'd just said, or mention events that hadn't happened. "I'm getting worried about myself," I confided to her one evening, making sure my voice carried just the right note of vulnerability. "Sometimes I feel like my mind isn't as sharp as it used to be." Carmen's eyes lit up with predatory satisfaction. though she quickly masked it with concern. "Oh, sweetheart, that's perfectly normal at your age. Maybe we should talk to your doctor about it. Would you come with me?" I asked, playing the part of the confused, dependent elderly man she needed me to be. "I trust your judgment more than my own lately." Within a week, she'd scheduled an appointment with a geriatrician she'd researched for me. What she didn't know was that Dr. Richard Stevens was another former student of mine, now a respected physician who specialized in elder care. I'd called him in advance to explain the situation. During the appointment, I continued my performance while Carmen sat beside me, occasionally interrupting to mention incidents of confusion she'd witnessed. Dr. Stevens played his part perfectly, ordering a series of cognitive tests that would take several weeks to complete. Meanwhile, Sarah was ramping up her own involvement. She began calling more frequently, always asking about my health and whether I was feeling like myself. She started visiting more often, usually with Carmen, and I noticed her paying particular attention to my financial documents whenever they were visible. During one visit, I deliberately left my bank statement on the kitchen counter. It was from my checking account, the one I used for daily expenses, showing a balance of about $15,000. I watched Sarah's face carefully as she glanced at it, and I saw exactly what I expected: disappointment mixed with calculation. She thought $15,000 was all I had. This confirmed what I'd suspected from reading her messages. Sarah believed she was orchestrating this elaborate scheme for a relatively modest inheritance. She had no idea she was potentially walking away from millions. The irony was delicious. Springs 2 months into my performance, Carmen made her first major move. She arrived at my house one afternoon with a folder full of papers and a concerned expression that belonged in a community theater production. "Robert, honey, I've been thinking about our conversation last week," she began, settling into the chair across from my recliner. "When you said you were worried about making good decisions about your finances and your health, I looked up from my newspaper with the slightly vacant expression I'd been perfecting." "What conversation was that, dear?" She paused, clearly pleased by my apparent confusion. "We talked about how you've been feeling overwhelmed lately. You said you wished you had someone you could trust to help you make important decisions." I frowned as if trying to remember, then nodded slowly. "Oh yes, I do feel like everything is getting too complicated for me these days. Well, I've been doing some research, and I found out about something called a power of attorney. It would allow me to help you with financial decisions and medical choices, but only when you want me to. You'd still be in control of everything." She slid the papers across the coffee table toward me. They were professionally prepared documents that would give her broad authority over my finances and healthcare decisions. Essentially, signing them would hand her the keys to my entire life. "Sarah helped me find a lawyer who specializes in elder care," Carmen continued. "She's just as worried about you as I am. We both want to make sure you're protected." The mention of Sarah's involvement was the confirmation I'd been waiting for. I picked up the documents and pretended to read them, occasionally asking Carmen to explain certain terms. She was patient and thorough, clearly having rehearsed her explanations. "I suppose it would be good to have someone looking out for me," I said finally, "but these seem like important papers. Maybe I should have my own lawyer look at them first." Carmen's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course, sweetheart, but the lawyer who prepared these is very well regarded." Sarah checked his credentials thoroughly, and honestly, lawyers can be so expensive. This would save you quite a bit of money. The pressure was subtle but persistent. Over the next week, Carmen brought up the power of attorney documents every day. She'd mention news stories about elderly people being taken advantage of by unscrupulous financial advisors, or talk about how much peace of mind it would give her to know she could help me if something happened. Sarah joined the campaign during her next visit, playing the role of the dutiful daughter who just wanted her father protected. "Dad, Carmen showed me those papers," she said, her performance nearly as polished as her co-conspirators. "I really think it's a smart idea. I mean, what if something happened to you and you couldn't make decisions for yourself? At least this way, someone you trust would be able to take care of things." They were good, I had to admit. Their approach was patient, caring, and seemed completely reasonable. If I'd actually been the confused, vulnerable old man they believed me to be, I probably would have signed the papers gladly. Instead, I told them I needed a few more days to think about it and that I wanted to discuss it with my doctor first. The appointment with Dr. Stevens was the cornerstone of their plan. Carmen drove me to his office, and during the consultation, she made sure to mention my episodes of confusion and her concerns about my ability to live independently. He's been getting lost driving the places he's been going for years, she told the doctor, her voice heavy with manufactured worry. And last week, I found him standing in his kitchen at 2 in the morning, completely confused about why he was there. Doctor Stevens nodded gravely and asked me a series of questions about my mental state. I gave answers that were just confused enough to be concerning, but not so dramatic as to be obviously fake. After the examination, Dr. Stevens asked to speak with Carmen privately. This was the moment I'd been waiting for. While they talked in his office, I activated the recording app on my phone and left it running in my jacket pocket. I'm very concerned about Robert's cognitive state, Dr. Stevens told her, playing his role perfectly. The tests show signs of early-stage dementia, and his judgment appears to be significantly impaired. In my professional opinion, he shouldn't be making major financial or medical decisions without assistance. Carmen's response was everything I'd hoped for. What kind of assistance would he need? I'd been trying to get him to let me help with some of his paperwork, but he's been resistant. Given the progression of his symptoms, I would recommend that someone trustworthy be given power of attorney as soon as possible. The longer you wait, the more difficult it becomes to ensure his affairs are properly managed. When they called me back into the office, Dr. Stevens delivered his recommendation with the perfect blend of medical authority and gentle concern. Robert, based on our tests and my examination, I'm recommending that you consider having someone you trust help you with important decisions. It's not uncommon for people in your situation, and it doesn't mean you can't still live independently. I looked confused and a little frightened. What kind of decisions? Financial matters, primarily, and perhaps medical decisions if your condition progresses. Carmen squeezed my hand supportively. Remember those papers we talked about, honey? The ones that would let me help you when you need it? I nodded slowly, as if the pieces were finally falling into place. I think maybe that would be a good idea. The trap was set. Now all I had to do was spring it. I signed the power of attorney documents on a Friday afternoon in April, with Carmen and Sarah both present as witnesses. The lawyer Carmen had chosen a sleazy character named Morrison, who clearly specialized in helping people exploit the elderly, explained the terms with practiced efficiency. As my signature dried on the papers, I could practically see the dollar signs reflecting in Carmen's eyes. Sarah was more controlled, but I caught her exchanging a meaningful glance with her co-conspirator when she thought I wasn't looking. Now, don't worry about anything, Carmen said as we left the lawyer's office. I'm going to take such good care of you. The weekend passed quietly, but on Monday morning, Carmen arrived at my house with a new sense of purpose. She brought a briefcase full of financial documents and a laptop computer. I thought we should start by getting organized, she announced, settling herself at my kitchen table. I need to understand exactly what we're working with so I can manage things properly. I played the confused but compliant elderly man, bringing her my bank statements, investment papers, and property documents, or at least the ones I wanted her to see. The paperwork I showed her painted a picture of a comfortable but not wealthy retiree, a checking account with about $20,000, a modest savings account, and a small portfolio of conservative investments. Is this everything? Carmen asked, clearly disappointed by the relatively small amounts. I think so, I said uncertainly. My father left me the house when he died, and there might be some other papers in his old desk, but I'm not sure what's important. Carmen's eyes lit up at the mention of my father's papers. Why don't we look through those together? I want to make sure we're not missing anything important. I led her to my father's old roll-top desk in the spare bedroom, where I'd carefully planted additional documents. These papers told a more interesting story. They suggested that my father had owned several rental properties, though the current status of those properties was unclear from the documents. Robert, honey, Carmen said after studying the papers for an hour. I think your father might have left you more than you realized. These look like property deeds. I squinted at the papers, as if seeing them for the first time. Do you think so? I always just assumed Dad was pretty simple financially. Over the next week, Carmen embarked on what she clearly thought was a treasure hunt. She accompanied me to the bank, where a sympathetic manager, another former student who'd been briefed on the situation, helped us access a safety deposit box that contained additional property documents. The papers in the box revealed what Carmen had been hoping to find: evidence of substantial real estate holdings. According to the documents, I owned 4 rental properties in addition to my primary residence, plus a small commercial building that generated monthly income. But the documents also contained something Carmen hadn't expected: evidence that the properties were heavily mortgaged and generating very little actual profit. According to the paperwork I had prepared, my father had taken out second mortgages on most of the properties shortly before his death, leaving me with assets that were essentially worthless from a cash perspective. Carmen tried to hide her disappointment, but I could see the wheels turning in her head. She'd invested months in this con, and the payout was looking much smaller than she'd anticipated. That's when Sarah made her first tactical error. During dinner at my house the following Sunday, Sarah brought up a subject that revealed just how much she and Carmen had been planning behind my back. "Dad, Carmen was telling me about those properties Grandpa left," she said, trying to sound casual. "It sounds like they're kind of a burden. Have you thought about maybe selling them and simplifying your life?" I looked confused. Selling them? But wouldn't that leave me with even less money? Carmen jumped in smoothly. "Not necessarily, sweetheart. Even with the mortgage, there might be some equity there. And think about how much easier it would be if you didn't have to worry about being a landlord. Plus," Sarah added, "you could put the money into something safer, like a trust or an annuity, something Carmen could help you manage." The suggestion was reasonable on the surface, but I recognized it for what it was: an attempt to liquidate my assets into a form they could more easily control and steal. I pretended to consider their advice seriously. "I suppose you're right. Managing all those properties does seem overwhelming lately. Maybe I should talk to a real estate agent?" "Actually," Carmen said, "I know someone who might be interested in buying them directly. It would save you the hassle of dealing with realtors and banks." Of course she did. No doubt this mysterious buyer was another accomplice who would purchase my properties at below market value, with the proceeds flowing back to Carmen and Sarah through some convoluted arrangement. But I played along, nodding as if their plan made perfect sense. "That sounds wonderful," I said. "I trust your judgment completely." Carmen squeezed my hand affectionately. "Don't worry about anything, Robert. Sarah and I are going to take care of everything." That Tuesday, Carmen introduced me to the potential buyer, a smooth-talking man named Peterson, who claimed to specialize in purchasing rental properties from elderly owners who wanted to simplify their lives. Peterson offered to buy all 4 properties for a lump sum that was roughly 60% of their actual value, claiming this was fair given the mortgages and the condition of the buildings. "It's really a favor to you," he explained. "Buying properties with existing tenants and outstanding loans is complicated. Most investors wouldn't touch a deal like this." I nodded as if I understood, occasionally asking Carmen to explain things I found confusing. She was patient and thorough, clearly believing she was manipulating a confused old man into a transaction that would benefit everyone except me. "Should I sign the papers?" I asked uncertainly. "I think it's a good idea," Carmen said. "It'll give you a nice nest egg, and you won't have to worry about being a landlord anymore." I was about to sign the purchase agreement when I suddenly stopped and looked up with a confused expression. "Wait," I said slowly. "I think I'm forgetting something important." Carmen's smile tightened with barely concealed impatience. "What is it, honey?" "Didn't my lawyer tell me I needed to have any major financial decisions reviewed by someone independent? Something about protecting me from making mistakes?" Peterson looked annoyed. "That's really not necessary for a straightforward transaction like this." But Carmen, sensing that pushing too hard might raise suspicions, intervened smoothly. "Of course, sweetheart. We want to make sure everything is done properly. Why don't we have your lawyer review the papers before you sign them?" I smiled gratefully. "That would make me feel much better." The appointment with my lawyer was scheduled for the following Friday. What Carmen and Sarah didn't know was that this would be the day their careful conspiracy finally came crashing down around them. Justice served. My lawyer, Edward Whitman, had been handling my family's legal affairs for over 20 years. He was also the executor of my father's estate and one of the few people who knew the true extent of my inheritance. When I'd first explained Carmen and Sarah's scheme to him, his reaction had been a mixture of outrage and disbelief. But as a man who'd spent 4 decades practicing law, he also appreciated the elegance of the trap I was setting. The meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. on Friday afternoon. Carmen drove me to the lawyer's office, chattering nervously about how nice it would be to have everything settled. Sarah met us there, claiming she wanted to be present to make sure her father's interests were protected. The three of us sat in Mr. Whitman's conference room while he reviewed the property sale documents. He took his time, occasionally asking questions and making notes. "These properties," he said finally, looking up at me over his reading glasses. "You're planning to sell all 4 of them?" "Carmen thinks it's a good idea," I said, maintaining my confused elderly persona. "She says it'll simplify things for me." Mr. Whitman nodded thoughtfully. "I can see the appeal of that. But before we proceed, I think there are some things we need to discuss. Some discrepancies I've noticed." Carmen leaned forward. "What kind of discrepancies?" Well, according to these documents, you're planning to sell these properties for a total of $340,000. But according to my records, the current market value of these 4 properties is closer to $1.2 million. The blood drained from Carmen's face. That can't be right. The buyer explained that the mortgages and the condition of the properties ... "Ah, yes, the mortgages," Mr. Whitman interrupted. "That's another interesting discrepancy. According to the documents you've shown me, these properties are heavily mortgaged. But according to the actual property records, 3 of them are owned free and clear, and the 4th has less than $50,000 remaining on its mortgage." Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "What are you saying?" Mr. Whitman turned to me with a serious expression. "Mr. Harrison, I'm afraid someone has been providing you with false financial information, either through incompetence or more malicious intent." I blinked as if confused by this revelation. "False information? Could Carmen help me organize all these papers? She wouldn't—" "I'm sure it was just a misunderstanding," Carmen said quickly, but her voice was shaking. "Maybe some of the documents got mixed up." "Perhaps," Mr. Whitman said. "But there's something else we need to discuss. Mr. Harrison, when you signed that power of attorney document last week, did you understand that you were giving Mrs. Valencia the authority to make financial decisions on your behalf?" "She said it would help her take care of me," I said uncertainly. "I'm sure she did. But I have to ask, have you been experiencing any cognitive difficulties lately? Any confusion or memory problems?" This was the moment I'd been waiting for. I straightened up in my chair and looked directly at Carmen, my expression transforming from confused to crystal clear. "As a matter of fact, Ed, my mind has never been sharper." The change in my demeanor was so sudden and complete that Carmen actually gasped. Sarah's mouth fell open. "You see," I continued, my voice now carrying the authority of a man who'd spent 40 years teaching students to think critically, "I've been conducting a little experiment in human nature, and the results have been absolutely fascinating." I reached into my jacket and pulled out a small recording device, placing it on the table in front of them. "For the past 3 months, I've been documenting every conversation, every suggestion, every manipulation attempt. Carmen, my dear, you and my daughter have provided me with enough evidence to ensure that you'll both be spending considerable time reflecting on your choices in a state facility." Carmen tried to stand, but her legs seemed to give out beneath her. "Robert, I don't understand. I love you. Everything I did was because I care about you." "Really?" I pulled out my phone and played back one of her recorded conversations with Sarah. Her own voice filled the room. "The old ones can be surprisingly stubborn, but they all break eventually. It's just a matter of finding the right pressure points." Sarah's face had gone completely white. "Dad, I can explain ... double quotes. Can you?" Because I'd love to hear your explanation for conspiring with a known con artist to steal my inheritance. Yes, Carmen, I know all about your real name, your criminal background, and your husband in Mexico. Did you really think I was too senile to do a background check? Mr. Whitman had been quietly organizing documents while I spoke. Now he cleared his throat. Mr. Harrison, based on what you've told me and the evidence you've provided, I believe we have grounds to pursue criminal charges for elder abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud, and attempted theft. The power of attorney document will, of course, be voided immediately. Wait, Sarah said desperately. Dad, please. I know how this looks, but I was just worried about your future. You're getting older, and you thought you'd recruit a professional con artist to steal from me. I stood up, my full height and presence finally visible again. Sarah, I raised you to be better than this. I gave you every advantage, every opportunity to build a good life. And this is how you repay me? Carmen made one last attempt to save herself. Robert, honey, you have to understand. I do love you. Yes, maybe I got carried away with trying to help, but my feelings for you are real. I looked at her with the cold clarity of a man who'd finally seen behind a beautiful mask. Carmen, or whoever you really are, you made one critical error in your assessment of your target. You assumed that because I'm 66 years old, I must be naive, weak, and easily manipulated. But what you failed to understand is that I've spent my entire career studying human behavior, analyzing historical patterns of deception and conquest. You didn't con a confused old man. You attempted to con a historian who's made a lifetime study of human treachery. I turned to Mr. Whitman. Ed, please contact Detective Rodriguez at the St. Petersburg Police Department. I believe he'll be very interested in what we have to discuss. As the reality of their situation finally sank in, Carmen began to cry real tears this time, not the calculated performances I've been witnessing for months. Sarah just sat in stunned silence, apparently unable to process how completely their plan had backfired. One more thing, I said as Mr. Whitman reached for the phone. The properties you were so eager to help me sell? They're actually just the tip of the iceberg. My father left me considerably more than either of you realized. But don't worry, you won't have to concern yourselves with helping me manage my finances. I have a feeling you'll both be too busy with other matters for quite some time. The legal aftermath moved swiftly. Carmen, whose real name was indeed Carmen Foster, was arrested on multiple charges, including elder abuse, fraud, and conspiracy. Her background check revealed that she was wanted in 2 other states for similar schemes, and she was already married to a man who helped her create false identities. The evidence I'd gathered was overwhelming. The recordings, the documentation of their conspiracy, and the testimony from my private investigator created an airtight case. Carmen's lawyer quickly recommended a plea bargain, and she was sentenced to 5 years in state prison. Sarah's situation was more complex. As my daughter, she faced charges of conspiracy and attempted elder abuse. But her lawyer argued that she'd been manipulated by Carmen into believing I was actually becoming incompetent. The prosecutor was willing to consider a reduced sentence in exchange for her testimony against Carmen. But I had one more surprise in store for my daughter. 3 weeks after Carmen's arrest, I asked Sarah to meet me at Mr. Whitman's office for what I told her was a discussion about how to move forward as a family. She arrived looking haggard and defeated. The stress of the legal proceedings had taken a visible toll on her, and for the first time in months, I felt a twinge of the paternal love that had once defined our relationship. Dad, she began as soon as she sat down, I know you probably hate me right now, and I don't blame you. But I need you to know that I never meant for things to go this far. I was desperate. And when Carmen approached me with this plan, I thought, you thought you could steal from me without consequences. I finished. She flinched at my bluntness. I thought I was securing my daughter's futures. I thought you were hiding money from us, and I convinced myself that what we were doing was just ... accelerating an inheritance that would come to me anyway, and that justified partnering with a criminal to defraud me? Sarah's shoulders sagged. No, nothing justifies that. I've spent every day since your arrest wishing I could take it all back. I studied my daughter's face, looking for signs of genuine remorse. What I saw was a woman who'd made terrible choices and was finally facing the consequences. But I also saw something else. Fear. Fear for her future, for her children's futures, and for the relationship with her father that she'd destroyed. "Sarah," I said finally, "do you want to know the most painful part of this entire experience?" She nodded, tears starting to form in her eyes. "It's not that you tried to steal from me. It's not even that you partnered with someone like Carmen. It's that you never once asked me for help." The tears started flowing freely now. "What do you mean?" "If you were in financial trouble, if you were worried about the girls' college funds, if you needed help with the mortgage, why didn't you just come to me? Why didn't you trust me enough to believe that I would take care of my own family? Because you never talked about money," she said through her sobs. "You lived like you didn't have any, and when Grandpa died, you acted like you'd inherited nothing. How was I supposed to know you could help?" It was a fair point, and one I'd been grappling with since this whole ordeal began. My secrecy about my financial situation had been a test, but perhaps it had been an unfair one. "You're right," I admitted. "I should have been more open with you, but that doesn't excuse what you did." Mr. Whitman cleared his throat. "If I may interrupt, I think this conversation is leading somewhere productive. Mr. Harrison, you asked me to prepare some documents based on how this meeting went. Should I proceed?" I nodded. "Sarah, despite everything that's happened, you're still my daughter. And those two girls of yours are still my granddaughters. I won't let what you've done destroy their futures." Mr. Whitman slid a document across the table to Sarah. "This is a trust fund for your daughter's education. It contains enough money to pay for both of their college educations, including graduate school if they choose to pursue it." Sarah stared at the document in shock. "Dad, I don't understand." "After what I did, the trust comes with conditions," I continued. "You'll have no access to the money. It goes directly to the schools when the girls are ready for college. And there's a behavior clause. If either of the girls is convicted of a crime involving fraud or theft, they forfeit their access to the trust." I don't know what to say. "Furthermore," I continued, "I'm prepared to help you avoid jail time. I'll speak to the prosecutor and recommend that you receive probation instead of prison time, provided you agree to complete community service and attend counseling." The relief on Sarah's face was palpable. "Dad, thank you. I know I don't deserve ... "You don't," I agreed. "But your daughters do deserve a chance to learn from their mother's mistakes and build better lives." Mr. Whitman produced another document. "There's one more thing. Sarah, your father is prepared to pay off your mortgage and give you a lump sum of $50,000 to help stabilize your family's finances." Sarah's mouth fell open. $50,000? "Dad, that's more than generous. But I thought you said Grandpa didn't leave you much money." I smiled for the first time since this whole ordeal had begun. "Sarah, your grandfather left me considerably more than I ever let you believe. In fact, the inheritance totaled just over $4 million. The number hung in the air like a physical presence. Sarah stared at me in stunned silence. "$4 million?" She whispered. "$4 million. Which means the scheme you and Carmen cooked up wasn't just morally reprehensible. It was also spectacularly stupid. If you'd simply been patient, if you'd been the kind of daughter I raised you to be, you would have inherited most of that money anyway." The full magnitude of what she'd thrown away seemed to hit her all at once. She put her head in her hands and began sobbing again. "But here's the thing, Sarah," I continued, my voice gentler now. "That was the inheritance you would have received. The woman who conspired to defraud her own father doesn't deserve the same legacy as the daughter I thought I'd raised." Mr. Whitman produced a final document. "This is your father's new will. As he mentioned, the trust for your daughter's education is protected, and he's taking care of your immediate financial crisis. Beyond that, you'll receive a total inheritance of $100,000 when he passes away. The remaining $3.5 million, I explained, will go to various charities, educational foundations, veterans organizations, and elder abuse prevention programs. Organizations that work to protect people like the vulnerable old man you thought I was." Sarah looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "Dad, I deserve that." "I know I do, but is there any chance? Any way I could ever earn your trust back?" Any way to prove that I'm not the person I became these past few months? I considered her question carefully. I don't know, Sarah. Trust, once broken, is incredibly difficult to rebuild. But I suppose time will tell what kind of person you choose to be going forward. She nodded, wiping her tears. I understand. And Dad? For what it's worth, I'm sorry. I'm sorrier than I've ever been about anything in my life. I know you are. And that's a start. 6 months have passed since that meeting in Mr. Whitman's office. Carmen is serving her sentence in a women's correctional facility about an hour north of Tampa. I've heard through legal channels that she's been a model prisoner, possibly hoping for early parole. Sarah received 2 years of probation and 500 hours of community service, which she's been completing at a local food bank. My granddaughters, Emma and Sophie, don't know the full details of what happened, but they understand that their mother made some serious mistakes and is working to make amends. Sarah has been more present in their lives since the crisis. And ironically, the family's financial stability has improved significantly since I paid off their mortgage and provided that emergency fund. I still live in the same modest house, drive the same Honda, and shop at the same grocery stores. But now my secrecy serves a different purpose. Word has gotten out in certain circles that the confused old widower everyone thought would be easy to exploit turned out to be far more formidable than expected. I've received several warnings from friends about people who've been asking questions about my finances or my living situation. Apparently, I've developed something of a reputation. Dr. Stevens, my co-conspirator in this elaborate sting operation, has asked me to speak to groups of healthcare providers about the warning signs of elder abuse. It's become something of a second career for me, traveling around Florida to educate professionals about the sophisticated schemes that target older adults. The key thing to understand, I tell these audiences, is that criminals who prey on the elderly aren't just looking for confused, isolated victims. They're often highly skilled manipulators who can fool family members, friends, and even trained professionals. The only real defense is vigilance, documentation, and the willingness to trust your instincts when something doesn't feel right. I've also started volunteer work with a legal aid organization that helps seniors who've been victimized by financial scams. Many of these cases are heartbreaking people who've lost their life savings to romance scammers, investment fraudsters, or even their own family members. But occasionally, we get to help someone fight back successfully, and those victories make all the other work worthwhile. Sarah and I have begun rebuilding our relationship, slowly and carefully. She comes to dinner once a month, and we're gradually learning to trust each other again. She's been attending therapy, both individual and family counseling, trying to understand how she became capable of what she did. I think I convinced myself that you didn't really need the money, she told me during one of our recent dinners. You seemed so content with so little, and I was drowning in debt. It was easier to see you as someone who was hoarding resources than to face my own failures. And what do you see now? I asked. I see a man who worked hard his entire life, who inherited a blessing and chose to live modestly while planning for his family's future. I see someone who deserved better than the daughter he got. These conversations are painful, but they're necessary. Sarah is working to become the person she should have been all along, and I'm learning to forgive without forgetting. As for my inheritance, I've been having quite a bit of fun with it. The charitable contributions I've made have been deeply satisfying, funding scholarships for deserving students, supporting programs for veterans, and yes, contributing to organizations that combat elder abuse. But I've also made some changes to my lifestyle that would probably surprise Carmen if she knew about them. I bought a beautiful sailboat that I keep at a marina in St. Pete, and I've been taking sailing lessons from a crusty old sailor who doesn't care about my age as long as I can follow instructions. I've also been traveling more, visiting historical sites I've always wanted to see, but never had the time or money to explore. The irony isn't lost on me. By trying to steal my inheritance, Carmen and Sarah actually freed me to enjoy it. For years, I'd been so focused on preserving my father's legacy and testing my family's character that I'd forgotten to actually live. Now, at 66, I'm finally learning what it means to be wealthy, not just in terms of money, But in terms of experience, knowledge, and the satisfaction that comes from using your resources wisely, I think my father would approve. Just last week, I received an interesting piece of mail, a letter from Carmen, sent from prison. In it, she apologized for her actions and claimed that her feelings for me had been genuine, despite the criminal nature of her intentions. She asked if I would consider visiting her, saying she had things she wanted to explain in person. I showed the letter to Mr. Whitman, who advised against any contact. Women like her are master manipulators, he warned. Even from prison, she might be looking for another angle to work. But as I sat in my study that evening, looking out at the sunset over Tampa Bay, I found myself considering her request. Not because I believed her claims of genuine affection, and certainly not because I was considering any kind of reconciliation, but because I was curious about the psychology of someone who could orchestrate such an elaborate deception. What drives a person to make a living by exploiting the trust and vulnerability of others? How does someone become so skilled at manipulation that they can fool not just their victims, but their victims' families and even medical professionals? These are the kinds of questions that have always fascinated me as a student of human nature. Understanding evil, its motivations, its methods, its ultimate weaknesses, has been a lifelong pursuit. In the end, I decided not to visit Carmen. Some puzzles are better left unsolved, and some people are better left in the past. Besides, I had more important things to focus on. My granddaughters will be starting high school next year, and I want to be actively involved in their lives in a way I wasn't able to be during the drama with their mother. Emma is interested in marine biology, hence my sudden interest in sailing, and Sophie has shown remarkable artistic talent. The education trust I set up for them will ensure they can pursue whatever dreams they choose. But more importantly, I want to make sure they grow up understanding the values that my father tried to instill in me, the importance of hard work, the value of treating others with respect, and the understanding that true wealth comes not from what you accumulate, but from what you contribute. These are the lessons I wish I'd taught Sarah more effectively. Perhaps with Emma and Sophie, I'll get a second chance to leave the right kind of legacy. As I finish writing this account, I'm struck by how differently this story could have ended. If I'd been the confused, vulnerable man that Carmen and Sarah believed me to be, I would have lost everything. My father's legacy would have been squandered. My granddaughters' futures would have been compromised. And I would have spent my final years in some facility, believing I was being cared for by people who loved me. Instead, I'm sitting in my study, financially secure, surrounded by books that challenge my mind and memories that warm my heart. Tomorrow, I'm taking my sailboat out for a day trip to Anna Maria Island. Next week, I'm flying to Washington, D.C. to visit the Smithsonian museums I've always wanted to see. And next month, I'm starting a new volunteer position teaching basic financial literacy to seniors. Life, as it turns out, does begin at 66. The greatest lesson I've learned from this entire experience isn't about the importance of being suspicious or the prevalence of elder abuse. It's about the power of staying engaged with life, continuing to learn and grow, and never allowing yourself to become the person others expect you to be based on their own limitations. Carmen and Sarah saw an elderly widower and assumed they were looking at someone who was weak, isolated, and ready to be victimized. They never imagined they might be tangling with someone who had spent 40 years studying human behavior, who had resources they couldn't fathom, and who was perfectly capable of turning their own weapons against them. Their biggest mistake wasn't underestimating my intelligence or my financial resources. Their biggest mistake was underestimating my refusal to be a victim. That refusal, more than any inheritance or investment portfolio, is the most valuable thing my father left me, and it's the most important gift I can pass on to my granddaughters. The understanding that age is not weakness, that wisdom is more powerful than cunning, and that the best defense against those who would exploit you is to never stop being the person you choose to be. As for the future, I'm sure there will be other Carmen Valencias who see a 66-year-old widower and think they've found an easy mark. But word travels in certain circles, and I suspect most professional con artists have learned by now to look for easier targets. Still, if someone wants to try their luck against the old history teacher from Clearwater, I'll be ready. After all, I've got excellent students who've taught me quite a bit about the art of deception. I just hope they're prepared for the final exam. Thank you for staying with me and listening this far. Your attention is a gift. Did these minutes mean something to you? Then please follow the channel. Every click from you is a push that helps me keep bringing stories that truly stay with us.